resume record, share a screen, and there is the written document version of the paper. Have you gone to the modules to look at the written document, um, the assignment description, or have you looked at it under assignments?
Yes, I've looked at it.
Okay. So it's pretty basic. The probably the biggest issue that a lot of people misunderstand, because like I don't write a lot here. It's like it's one page, and that's including the images, right? But what I do say very clearly is this is a comparison in terms of form, right? There's a formal analysis, so it's in terms of composition and design, and it should not be a discussion of literary and literal differences between the paintings. So we're gonna start. I wonder if we can zoom in a little bit on these images. Oh, look, we can zoom in even more. Oh, that's excellent. Okay, you can see those pretty clearly, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. So, um, like a literal thing would be to say, to look at the two paintings and say something like, in Rubens' painting, there's a copper bowl at the base of the ladder, and in Beckman's painting, there are some gold coins at the base of the ladder. I'm not sure whether those are gold coins or not, but let's say they are, right? Um, and that's not really a relevant issue to the formal differences between the paintings. Or a number of people will kind of just count how many people are in the painting. Like there's one, two, three, four people helping Jesus descend the cross in the Beckman painting, and there are one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight people helping Jesus descend the cross in the Rubens painting. These are irrelevant issues, right? And really shouldn't be in the paper because they don't add anything to the formal differences between the paintings. The formal differences. Another way to put it is to really understand how these are different from each other formally. It's best to almost think of them as not being representations, not being pictures of stuff and telling a story, right? And instead, just think of them as abstract compositions in colors, right? And just kind of think about how are they organized. So um, that's the thing that people have the hardest time. Like right here says you can discuss subject, content, narrative, but your discussions of the content need to be related to the comparison of two works and related to the analysis of the composition slash design. So to give you an example of that, right? Let's see. I'm trying to think of a good example of something that would be like that. Um, okay, so you could say that our um, our attention is, besides being drawn directly to Christ because it's such a light value in the composition, our attention is secondarily drawn to this figure, right, who is in red, and that really the bright, intense color really draws our attention to that figure, and that figure also seems to be the one who's catching most of the weight, right, and that maybe that means something. Okay, that would be a slightly literary kind of analysis, but you're tying it into the fact that our through through abstract terms, right? Our attention is being drawn to that figure because that shape and that color is drawing attention to that section. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Um, all right. So that's the let's go back to modules for a second. That's the basic description. It appears that way in modules, and it appears that way the um, in the assignment description. But besides that, uh, there we are. In the module for the analysis paper, you can see there's the paper description itself, and then there's another document called the concept of design, which I can talk about in a second. There's a PDF that is a comparison of the images, Okay. And then there is also another document called reactions to the first drafts. And these are there to help support you. Let's start with the comparison images. We can open these up. And so here we can see the images larger. And then the other thing that I do is I even expand them even further so that you can look at details really closely. And you can see how by looking at them much more closely, you can see a lot more about what kind of decisions the artists are making in terms of color, in terms of textures, physical texture versus um, uh, simulated textures, right? So that's a lot more clear because of that. Okay. And let's go back. And so besides that, there are two other documents, and we're going to give Canvas a moment to get back on the right page. There we go. And one of the documents is called Concept of Design, because after all, you're supposed to be comparing these in terms of design issues, right? And keeping in mind that in terms of lectures, I haven't gone through all the design issues, right? We're only at Unit 5 right now. And so there's still quite a few design issues that I haven't yet covered. But what I have here is an outline of pretty much all of the design issues. So it's broken down to three main parts. The first part, which right here says part 3, but it's the first main part, right? Which is the visual elements. And so that includes like, line, shape, value, color, a lot on color, texture, space, and form. Space and form get not as much, partially because space and form is not as much of an issue in the comparison of these two paintings. Okay. Um, then part 4 is the design principles, otherwise known as principles of organization. And there are 7 of them: hierarchy and emphasis, unity, verity, rhythm, movement, economy, balance. Okay. Um, but then I also list a bunch of other design concepts, some of which we've already talked about, like figured ground, scale and proportion, visual pathways, phase structures. We haven't talked about visual pathways yet. That's in Unit 7. Symmetries, dynamics, right? So some we've discussed, some we have not yet discussed. And so, and this is a number of pages. It's 11 pages long, right? And I'm not necessarily expecting you to have to like just read through the whole thing. Might be a little bit dense, but instead, kind of like when you're looking at the works and you start thinking to yourself, oh, maybe I might want to make a comparison between these two in terms of how they use value. Then you might want to go to the value section that I have and kind of just read through it and see that you understand all the points I think are important about understanding value. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So we're going to go next to um, back to the module because there's a lot here in the module. And and then lastly, there's a document called Reactions to the First Drafts. I really need to update this because this is from a while ago, but it still applies a lot. And what it is, and I will do this when everyone turns in their first drafts. I will also send a document to everyone that will be a breakdown of all my reactions to yours, right? Not just to you individually. That will be in the notes listed with your assignment, but I'll send a document. Well, and I'll make it so that it's anonymous, so people won't know, who I'm correcting or whatever. But the main reason is so that, like, if let's say in your paper, you make the case that, um, let's say, rhythm and repetition are really important in as a contrast in the two paintings, and and then you make the case that the the rhythm and repetition in the Beckman is more fluid and more kind of curvilinear and organic, and in the Rubens it's a more kind of staccato. And I would I would then probably write a thing saying, I think you're incorrect there. And then I'd explain why and say, I think it's kind of the opposite. And here's why, right? And but if I do all that for you to basically give you a whole new way of thinking about looking at these, it's not fair just to give it to you. So I give it to everyone. So anything like that, where I look at how you analyzed it and then I reanalyze it and give you a second opinion, right? I share that with everybody. Um, okay, so this is from, and this includes a lot of just kind of basic mistakes that everyone kind of makes. So it's kind of in random order, but it does start mostly with just kind of like the simple basics of kind of things, such as um, making sure that you don't put the title of the paintings in quotes, but you either put them in underlines or in italics, right? That's a classic one. Um, the rule is in grammar, right, that you only put quotes around things that are like created works that are part of a whole, right? So an article in a magazine would have quotes, but a title of a book would have an underline or an italics, right? And paintings are considered a whole. They're not considered a part of a thing in general, right? And artworks in general are not. But also spelling the name of the artist correctly. Like so many people misspell Rubens' name. It's many people want to spell it like the sandwich. It's not spelled the same way as a Reuben sandwich. Many people want to spell it without the N, or if they include the N, they assume it's always with an apostrophe, right? But it's no, the last name ends with an S, and of course that also means that if you then use it with a possessive, meaning like you're trying to say something that belongs to Rubens, like Rubens painting, right? You then have to do, Rubens, Rubens, then apostrophe, not Rubnben, and then apostrophe S, because that then would be assuming that the name Reuben is without an S normally. Stuff like that. So I cover just a lot of basic sort of mistakes that people might make in the paper. So I strongly recommend that you read this because it will give you a sense of like what things to avoid, what mistakes to avoid. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So that's pretty much everything that's in the module that could be helpful to you. There is another document that I'm going to send to you guys, um, and it's this one, and I'm going to send it to you both as a PowerPoint and as a PDF. And let's go to slideshow from beginning. Okay, so it starts out pretty much the same as the other stuff where we have the large image side by side. Okay, but in this, what I'm doing is I'm showing you, um, don't do that. I'm showing a number of ways to kind of like look at the artworks, and I'm listing all these things. So I'm showing them to you black and white because I think that will help you much better to see the difference between the way they use value. I'm showing to blurred, and then even more blurred and blurred upside down, posterized, and I have it with kind of like movements marked out and with kind of like the page geometry marked out so you can kind of see like where perfect center is in both of them and stuff like that. Right? Perfect center is right about there. I've also broken them up into tiles. And this helps you to kind of also to see things like what colors are being predominantly used more clearly, right? Because like when you look at them this way, you really understand, oh wow, it's like it's really dominated by just a few sets of colors. Um, and also like what values and what value ranges, right? You really get a much clearer idea of how much light and light mid values, how much that dominates the Beckman painting when you look at it this way. And then I do the same thing with them really large. And then I have a bunch of other ones, other kinds of comparisons for you to kind of look at and think about how you would make comparisons between them. And I don't know. So do you have any questions about the comparison paper?
No, sir. I think you covered all the questions that I had.
That's good. Great. Well, there is what you don't realize is there is yet one more question that you don't know you have. which is there's another resource for you. If you go to the YouTube page, right, ASW Art Appreciation, and that's where like most of my videos are stored that way. And you can, and you generally, I have them either like linked into Canvas and you can just watch them in Canvas, but I also send them as emails to you. But you could just go to the YouTube page to watch them, right? And they're organized in groups this way. But if you go to playlists, you can see some playlists that don't show up normally. And one of the playlists is reviews of tests and papers. Whoops, wasn't meaning to start that. And if we look at reviews of test paper, we've got the comparison questions, right? Part one, 3, and 4. I don't know where part 2 is. Missing somewhere. But these can help you both with studying for the test, like midterms are coming up this Friday. And so looking over the old midterm reviews, because one of the main things I do on the midterm reviews is I just go through the artwork one by one and just kind of, you know, remind you of all the things we've learned about that work of art and, you know, like, and just in kind of a list, right? Like, do you remember that email I sent out about Donatello's David? And I just kind of like said, like, it's freestanding, it's in the round, it's figurative, it's sculpture, it is cast bronze, and it's early Renaissance. And I mean, I could come up with a couple more, but like, you know, just kind of listing all of those sort of things. That way you can easily, very quickly on a test, just try to remember, oh yeah, it's this and this and this, right? Okay. Um, but there is also videos here that are just for the paper. I'm trying to feel like maybe there's, um, this might start it. And in it, I'm like literally just talking about the differences between the works and talking about some of the strategies of like what things, what kind of like um, ways of comparing them you might want to consider. I strongly recommend that everyone think about value as being one of the main things they talk about. Value is a significant difference between these two. And um, I think you could, I'll make this case right now. You could say that in the Rubens painting, because it's a Baroque painting, value and value contrast is the primary way that he creates both unity and contrast and hierarchy and emphasis, right? And then you can kind of like, if you can figure out how he does all three of those using value. And then because Beckman is using value very differently in a modernist way, whereas there's a lot less value contrast in general. Like there's a lot less contrast across any particular form, right? Um, and most of the value contrast is based off of like local values, right? Like that shirt is dark because it's a dark shirt, not because of the lighting. Does that make sense? So because of that, because of those decisions that Beckman's made, he's had to find other ways to create unity, other ways to create hierarchy, and other ways to create contrast. Okay, so by kind of like really zooming in on value, it can help you to understand all those other topics. So I strongly recommend that you start from the point of view of value and move from there. And so I would also recommend that you do watch at least this first video. I go all the way through just talking about. Eventually, I get to other comparisons. Oh, look, I talked about. Oh, I thought I talked about them for a while, looking at them upside down. I guess I don't. And yeah, so what do we have? That's about half an hour. Do you want to stay? We could do another 20 minutes. I could do the lecture on was the piety impulse on art and faith, or I could just record that at a later date if you don't have a lot of time.
Unfortunately, I just got to work, so I
Okay.
probably wouldn't be able to stay.
Okay. All right. Well, then I'll probably record that video sometime around 5, and I will have another Zoom at 7 tonight. And so if you have any questions about the paper or about starting to study for the midterms, and it's perfectly okay if you want to like just jump into a Zoom just to ask a couple of questions and then, and then just in the chat say, sorry, I have to leave early, but I got this to do. I don't mind that. The thing I want to make sure is that everyone get their questions answered.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Well, good luck with everything, and I will see you later.
Great. Thank you so much.
All right. You're welcome.